Who was the boy in the box? America's oldest child mystery finally has a name. Before we dive in, kindly hit the subscribe button and let us know where you are watching from in the comment. It was a gray, bitterly cold February afternoon in 1957, the kind that clung to your bones and made every breath feel like broken glass. In the Fox Chase neighborhood of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a place where secrets blew through the trees like whispers, an 18-year-old college student was walking through a patch of woods off Susquehanna Road. He was checking his muskrat traps, though trapping was illegal in that area. The path was littered with winter debris, broken branches, discarded trash, and fallen leaves sealed in frost. But what he stumbled upon was unlike anything the city or the nation had ever seen. There, in a discarded cardboard box once used to carry a JCPenney baby bassinet, lay the body of a small, naked boy wrapped in a tattered flannel blanket. His hair had been crudely chopped, his body bruised, and his eyes closed to a world that had seemingly discarded him. The student was afraid of being caught for illegal trapping and left the scene without calling the police. Days later, a man gathering brushwood also came across the box and alerted authorities. When the police arrived, they had no idea they were standing at the beginning of one of America's oldest and most haunting, unsolved mysteries. The boy was estimated to be between 3 and 7 years old, though he was so emaciated and malnourished that even experienced medical examiners couldn't pin down his age with certainty. He weighed just 30 pounds. His body showed signs of prolonged neglect. His hands and feet were wrinkled, likely from being submerged in water shortly before or after death. His fingernails had been trimmed. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head. But beyond that, the authorities had little to go on. There were no signs of sexual abuse, no defensive wounds, no identifying marks other than surgical scars on his ankle and groin, and a recent cut on his chin. The local media picked up the story quickly. Flyers showing a forensic sketch of the boy's face were distributed across Pennsylvania and beyond. They were placed in gas stations, handed out door to door, and even inserted into utility bills. The police dressed the boy's body and propped him up in a seated position for post-mortem photos, hoping someone might recognize his face. Yet, despite their best efforts, no one came forward to claim him. Philadelphia residents were horrified. How could a child simply vanish from the world without a trace? No missing persons report, no panicked parents, no distant relatives calling in tips. The case soon became known as the boy in the box, and it would haunt generations of detectives, journalists, and amateur sleuths alike. The police scoured local hospitals and schools, searching for children who matched the boy's description. They examined every missing child report across the country. They looked into orphanages, foster homes, and even traveling carnivals that had passed through town in the weeks leading up to the discovery. One promising lead came from a foster home located just 1.5 miles from where the body was found. The home had a history of abuse, and its proximity to the crime scene couldn't be ignored. A psychic even claimed to have had visions that directed police to the foster home, giving them reason to investigate further. Yet after thorough searches and interviews, the trail again went cold. Detectives also turned to forensic science. Over the decades, as technology advanced, so did efforts to extract meaningful evidence. In the 1990s, DNA was pulled from the boy's remains, but there was nothing to compare it to. His DNA profile was uploaded to national databases, but still no matches. The mystery only deepened with time. By the 2000s, a new wave of interest in true crime, fueled by documentaries and online forums, brought a fresh army of sleuths to the case. The internet became a breeding ground for theories. Some believed the boy had been the victim of human trafficking. Others pointed to a more sinister explanation, that the child had been hidden away by a wealthy family and disposed of when he became an inconvenience or embarrassment. One of the most talked about theories came from a woman known only as M, who claimed that her abusive mother had purchased the boy, named Jonathan, from his birth parents, and eventually killed him during a fit of rage. Investigators found aspects of her story compelling, including knowledge of surgical scars on the boy's body, but they were never able to corroborate her claims. Through all the theories and speculation, the one constant was the photograph of the boy's face. Frozen in time, it symbolized not just a child lost, but a failure to protect the most vulnerable among us. In 1998, the boy's body was exhumed in hopes of finding more clues. The site at Ivy Hill Cemetery, marked with a gravestone reading "America's Unknown Child," became a place of mourning and reflection. Then, in 2022, more than 65 years after the body was found, investigators made a breakthrough. Thanks to advances in forensic genealogy and DNA technology, the boy was identified as Joseph Augustus Zarelli. He had been born in 1953 and died at the age of 4. Investigators matched DNA from the boy to a relative through a public genealogy database. Further testing confirmed the identity and led to both of his birth parents, who were long deceased. The boy had lived in West Philadelphia and had siblings still alive, though their identities remain protected. The announcement brought a strange mix of closure and sadness. For decades, Joseph had been a nameless, voiceless symbol. Now he was real. He had a name, a birthday, and a story, albeit one still riddled with unanswered questions. Why was he never reported missing? Who was responsible for his death? And why did no one speak up? Before the haunting image of the boy in the box became one of America's most well-known crime mysteries, before the headlines and media circus, there was a baby, a real child, a boy born into a world that would never know his voice, until decades later when DNA finally gave him a name: Joseph Augustus Zarelli. His life, once a question mark, now began to take shape. Not through his own words, but through the records, the people who may have known him, and the cold files that outlived him. To understand what happened to Joseph, we have to go back, to his beginnings, to the family that bore him, and to the hidden trauma that may have followed him to his untimely grave. On January 13, 2023, the Philadelphia Police Department made an announcement that shook the true crime world. They had identified the boy in the box. His name was Joseph Augustus Zarelli, born on January 13, 1953, exactly 70 years to the day before his name was released to the public. The breakthrough came thanks to advancements in forensic genealogy, which allowed authorities to link DNA extracted from the boy's exhumed remains to relatives on both his maternal and paternal sides. This eventually led to the identification of his parents, and then, to him, the identification didn't just give the boy a name. It gave him a story, or at least the fragments of one that investigators and journalists would work to piece together. Joseph Augustus Zarelli was born to a woman named Mary Elizabeth Abel. She was a young, unmarried woman from a well-known family in Philadelphia. According to genealogy researchers, Mary came from a relatively prominent household. But she gave birth in secret, and Joseph was never officially claimed. The identity of Joseph's father was initially withheld by authorities out of respect for the privacy of the still-living family members, but investigative genealogists quickly pieced together the paternal lineage. His father was identified as Augustus J. Zarelli, who had served in the military and worked in a local bakery. The circumstances of Joseph's birth are shrouded in secrecy. There are suggestions that Mary Elizabeth may have concealed her pregnancy from much of her family. Whether this was out of shame, pressure, or the social norms of 1950s America, we don't know. What we do know is this: Joseph was likely never given a chance at a normal life. He was born into the shadows, and there he stayed. This is the question that haunts investigators most. From the time of his birth to the time his battered body was discovered in the Fox Chase neighborhood of Philadelphia in February 1957, there is almost no trace of Joseph's life. No medical records, no school enrollment, no church baptism. It's as if he never existed. Genealogists and law enforcement theorize that Joseph may have been given away shortly after birth, possibly through unofficial or even illegal adoption. At the time, it was not uncommon for children born out of wedlock to be handed off to other families in secret, especially when reputations or social standing were at stake. Some speculate he may have lived with foster parents, or even in an orphanage. Others believe he was raised, briefly, by his birth mother or members of her extended family. No matter the theory, what remains consistent is this: wherever he was, Joseph's existence was not acknowledged publicly. He was hidden from the world. The autopsy conducted in 1957 painted a grim picture. Joseph had suffered extensive physical trauma: bruises, abrasions, and evidence of long-term neglect. His body showed signs of malnourishment. His hair had been crudely cut, and there were indications of healed and healing wounds. The coroner concluded that he had died from blunt force trauma, but what led to that moment, and who delivered the fatal blow, remains a mystery. What's even more heartbreaking is that many of his injuries were not consistent with a one-time assault. They pointed to sustained abuse. The question that follows: who was inflicting this pain on a 4-year-old boy, and why was no one stopping it? Investigators now believe that Joseph may have been passed around between caretakers. Some may have been ill-equipped or abusive. Others may have simply been silent. In either case, the system failed him because there was no system. Joseph wasn't in the books. He wasn't on any list. He had no paper trail. Over the years, law enforcement attempted to re-interview surviving members of the Zarelli and Abel families. Some were cooperative. Others refused to speak. What became clear was this: someone somewhere knew what happened, and they had chosen to take that knowledge to their grave. Genealogical evidence suggested that several of Joseph's half-siblings were still alive at the time of the DNA match in 2022. Some may have grown up just blocks away from where Joseph's body was discovered, never knowing he even existed. There are whispers, too, about what people may have known but refused to say. Some family members allegedly suspected Joseph had died young but were told to keep quiet. Others heard rumors of a child who had been given away or adopted out. But without proof, these remained stories until the science caught up. In the aftermath of Joseph's identification, media outlets swarmed to the story. It was, after all, a decades-old mystery, solved by science and persistence. But for those closest to the investigation, it wasn't about headlines. It was about dignity. Detective Robert Coulmier, who led the case for years, emphasized the importance of giving Joseph not only a name, but a voice. "He's not the boy in the box anymore," he said. "He's Joseph, and he deserves to be remembered as such." Authorities reburied Joseph's remains under a headstone now bearing his full name. The boy who once lay in an anonymous grave marked simply by a plaque now had a monument that told the world he mattered. Even with Joseph's name known, many questions remain unanswered. Who was responsible for his abuse? Where did he live in his final months? Was there a cover-up, and if so, by whom? Did anyone try to save him? The investigation is still considered active. Detectives continue to chase leads, comb through archives, and interview elderly individuals who may have seen or heard something back in the 1950s. And the public hasn't forgotten either. Social media campaigns, true crime podcasts, and YouTube creators keep Joseph's story alive, pushing for justice and answers. Joseph Augustus Zarelli was more than a tragic headline. He was a child born into a world that couldn't or wouldn't protect him. For decades, he was nameless, voiceless, buried in a box. But now, with each passing year, his identity becomes stronger. Through the tireless work of investigators and the power of modern science, Joseph is no longer invisible. For more chilling true crime stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. The road to justice for Joseph Augustus Zarelli was a long, winding, and deeply frustrating journey for those determined to find his name and his killer. From 1957 onward, the boy known only as America's Unknown Child became a puzzle that haunted detectives, forensic scientists, and amateur sleuths alike. The case was as baffling as it was heartbreaking. But beneath the weight of failure and frustration, a few dedicated individuals refused to let the trail go cold. On February 25, 1957, a college student cutting through a vacant lot in the Fox Chase neighborhood of Philadelphia stumbled upon a cardboard box lying in a weedy ditch. Inside was the body of a small boy, naked and battered, wrapped in a flannel blanket. The boy's hair had been roughly cut, so roughly, in fact, that clumps still clung to his body. His hands and feet were pruned from water exposure. He had deep bruises, especially around the head and torso. There were scars, one on his ankle, another on his groin, and an L-shaped scar beneath his chin. The police came quickly, and what followed was an avalanche of effort. Flyers printed and distributed, posters placed on telephone poles, and photos sent to orphanages and hospitals. The boy's face was even sketched in composite form and used in public appeals. But nothing came. No parents called. No relatives stepped forward. No one claimed the child. Detective Thomas Augustine was among the earliest officers assigned to the case. Over the decades, Augustine became almost synonymous with the investigation. Even after retiring, he remained devoted to uncovering the truth, maintaining files thicker than the Philadelphia phone book. "I couldn't forget that face," Augustine once said in an interview. "That little boy deserved better." Alongside Augustine were dozens of forensic specialists, detectives, and even students who saw the case as more than a puzzle. It was a mission. Over time, others joined the effort. Frank Bender, a forensic artist, created multiple reconstructions of the boy's face. The Vidic Society, a group of forensic professionals in Philadelphia dedicated to solving cold cases, took the boy's murder on as a priority. Bill Fleischer and Richard Walter, two founding members of the Vidic Society, contributed years of research and profiling. Each of them pursued leads that were unconventional, speculative, and sometimes desperate, but they kept going. One of the most publicized leads came from a foster home located just a few miles from where the boy's body was found. The owner, a man known for his eccentric behavior, became a person of interest due to circumstantial connections. Some investigators believed the boy may have lived there or died on the premises. However, a lack of evidence prevented charges or even public accusations. Another major theory involved a woman known only as M, who came forward in the early 2000s claiming her mother had purchased the boy illegally and later killed him in a fit of rage. The story had elements that matched the known facts, but inconsistencies and a lack of corroborating evidence led authorities to dismiss the claim. Then there were the leads that went absolutely nowhere. Tips from psychics, letters from prison inmates claiming knowledge of the case, and even confessions later determined to be false. For decades, each shred of hope led to another dead end. Still, investigators persisted. In 1957, forensic science was limited. Fingerprints were taken, but the boy's prints matched no known records. Dental records were non-existent. Facial reconstruction was rudimentary. By the 1990s, technology had evolved. The boy's remains were exhumed in 1998 in an attempt to retrieve better DNA samples. Forensic anthropologists confirmed his age and possible ethnic background, but once again, his identity remained hidden. It wasn't until the 2010s that genetic genealogy changed everything. The same technique used to identify the Golden State Killer would eventually play a key role in cracking the case of the boy in the box. In 2019, the Philadelphia Police Department partnered with renowned forensic genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick and other experts. Using DNA samples extracted from the boy's remains, the team uploaded the data into GEDmatch and other public genealogy databases. By painstakingly mapping out distant relatives and reverse engineering family trees, they narrowed down the possibilities. The work required hundreds of hours of digital sleuthing, historical record digging, and cross-checking birth certificates, death records, and census data. Eventually, the team zeroed in on two families, one from the mother's side, the other from the father's. In early 2022, confirmation came. The boy was Joseph Augustus Zarelli. For the first time in over 6 decades, the case had a name. It had a past. Identifying Joseph was only part of the battle. Investigators now face the equally daunting task of discovering who killed him and how. With many suspects deceased and others elderly, the challenge is urgent. Yet law enforcement remains hopeful. With renewed interest and technological advances, they believe new clues could still surface. They are focusing on family dynamics, unreported adoptions, and previously closed circles. Old medical records, adoption agency files, and community rumors are being revisited. Every conversation, every slip of memory could open a door. What's unique about the boy in the box case is how many members of the public have taken part in solving it. From amateur genealogists to podcasters to YouTube documentarians, the world has helped keep Joseph's story alive. Public forums, Reddit threads, and crime-solving Facebook groups have shared timelines, theory maps, and emotional appeals. People care, Not just about solving the case, but about remembering the boy who spent too long without a name. Chapter 3 is about more than the men and women who chased a ghost. It's about grit, obsession, and love for a child they never knew. The boy in the box wasn't just a case number, and he's no longer lost. Joseph Augustus Zarelli had a name, a face, and now, thanks to science and human perseverance, he has a story. With a name finally attached to the face of America's unknown child, a new phase of the investigation began. Now, law enforcement and the public alike wanted to understand the deepest question of all: why? Who could commit such a brutal crime against a child, and what kind of psychological forces were at play? Chapter 4 dives into the theories, the profiles, and the possibilities that have emerged from decades of speculation, expert analysis, and forensic insight. Early in the investigation, the Philadelphia Police Department brought in psychologists and behavioral experts to construct a profile of the killer. Based on the brutality and nature of the crime, several theories quickly emerged. The crime of passion. The killer may have been a parent or guardian who acted in a moment of uncontrollable rage. The blunt force trauma to the head and signs of prolonged abuse indicated this was not a singular moment of violence, but potentially the culmination of consistent mistreatment. Calculated concealment. The body had been bathed, hair hastily cut, and wrapped in a blanket, actions that suggested familiarity and even a degree of care. To investigators, it hinted that the killer knew the child personally and was attempting to reduce the visibility of abuse to mislead authorities. Post-mortem guilt. Some theorized that the way Joseph was placed in the box showed remorse. Could the killer have been battling guilt, even while covering up a crime? Joseph's identification led authorities to explore his family background. While much remains undisclosed to the public due to ongoing investigations, certain patterns have become clear. Joseph was never reported missing. His name never appeared on adoption rosters, school records, or medical files during his short life. This led experts to consider whether he was an unregistered or hidden child, concealed for reasons of shame, abuse, or neglect. Psychologists specializing in familial abuse point out that children born out of wedlock or under difficult circumstances are statistically more likely to be victims of infanticide or neglect-related homicide, especially in past decades where social stigmas were more pronounced. Could Joseph have been a secret child? One whose existence was inconvenient or shameful to those around him. It's a disturbing but plausible explanation that continues to be examined. Another leading theory is that Joseph's death wasn't the result of outright murder, but of sustained neglect. His malnourished state, unkempt hair, and visible injuries suggest long-term abuse. Neglect, in psychological terms, is a form of passive abuse, where a caregiver fails to meet a child's basic needs. Over time, neglect can result in both physical and mental deterioration. Combined with occasional outbursts of violence, it creates a toxic, often lethal environment. Experts believe that Joseph may have been subjected to this exact scenario. Whether it was the result of poverty, mental illness, or lack of familial support, neglect remains one of the most tragic, invisible causes of childhood death. Some armchair detectives and fringe theorists have speculated on a darker possibility, that Joseph's death was part of a ritual or cult-like behavior. While no direct evidence has supported this claim, the strange and careful way his body was positioned, hands neatly folded, wrapped in a blanket, gave rise to such speculation. Criminologists are quick to debunk these ideas unless substantiated by tangible evidence. Yet, the mystery surrounding the case still fuels the imagination, especially given the eerie silence from those who should have known or loved him. To better understand Joseph's death, analysts often examine similar historical cases. Maribel, UK, an 11-year-old girl who murdered 2 toddlers in the late 1960s. Her case highlighted how young individuals in abusive environments can replicate violence. The Cleveland Torso Murders, a series of killings where bodies were similarly dismembered and staged. Though not involving children, the case brought attention to killers who exhibit a pattern of control and post-crime manipulation. The Lisa Steinberg case, a young girl beaten to death by her illegally adoptive father, a former attorney. Like Joseph, Lisa was kept out of official records and isolated from the outside world. Each of these cases sheds light on behavioral patterns: control, shame, psychological deterioration, and secrecy. And each reminds us how vulnerable children can be, especially when they exist on the margins. Beyond the psychological, there's a sociological question. What does a case like Joseph say about 1950s America? At the time, issues like domestic abuse and child welfare were largely kept out of public discourse. Many families, especially in conservative communities, operated in silence. Mental illness was stigmatized, and resources for struggling families were minimal. Could Joseph have been a casualty of a society that failed him on every level, from family to state? Many criminologists say yes. The most chilling aspect of Joseph's case might be the silence. Once his identity was revealed, members of his extended family were located. Some cooperated. Others remained evasive. No one has yet claimed to know exactly what happened. Whether it's out of fear, loyalty, or shame, the refusal to speak underscores one of the central tragedies of the case. People knew and stayed silent. Psychologists explain this as the conspiracy of silence, a social contract where individuals choose ignorance or denial to protect their own worldview or family structure. Unfortunately, in cases of abuse, this silence often leads to the victim's continued suffering. In this chapter, we looked beyond the how and focused on the why. The psychological puzzle of Joseph's death is as haunting as the crime itself. While the identification of Joseph Augustus Zarelli brought a measure of peace, it also raised disturbing questions about secrecy, abuse, and neglect. It reminded us that the darkest horrors often happen behind closed doors. The mystery of the boy in the box may have a name now, Joseph Augustus Zarelli, but the story is far from over. In fact, this revelation has cracked open a much deeper and more disturbing question. Can justice ever truly be served for a child who died more than 6 decades ago? In this final chapter, we explore the meaning of justice in cold cases, the renewed efforts to seek accountability, and how society can, and must, respond to tragedies buried in the past. When Philadelphia authorities announced Joseph's identity in December 2022, it sent shockwaves through the true crime community and the broader public. After 65 years of speculation, the boy in the box was no longer nameless. But this revelation didn't come with the arrest of a killer or a confession. It came through forensic genealogy, years of tireless work from law enforcement, and the dedication of amateur sleuths who refused to let the case fade into obscurity. But the moment of recognition quickly gave way to a more sobering reality. Naming Joseph was only the beginning. Solving who he was hadn't answered who did it or why. In most criminal cases, justice means arrest, trial, and conviction. But in cold cases like this, especially when suspects may be dead or the trail too cold to follow, the definition becomes less clear. Can justice still be served without a courtroom? Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner stated that while the investigation remains open, the likelihood of pressing charges was slim due to the decades that have passed and the lack of direct evidence linking anyone to the murder. So what is justice for Joseph? Is it enough that we now know his name? Or does justice require accountability, public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and structural change? One of the most disturbing parts of Joseph's story isn't just the act of violence that ended his life. It's the systemic failures that allowed it to happen. Why was he never reported missing? How did no one come forward during those early years? What gaps in the child welfare system allowed a child to vanish in plain sight? Some critics argue that mid-20th century America lacked the infrastructure or sensitivity to detect child abuse, especially when it occurred behind closed doors. The stigma of illegitimacy, the silence surrounding mental health, and the absence of robust child protective services all contributed to an environment where a child like Joseph could disappear unnoticed. This is where modern justice can step in, not just by solving the crime, but by ensuring it never happens again. Since Joseph's identification, investigators have continued to dig into newly available family records, DNA matches, and confidential tips. A few things are now known. Joseph was born in 1953. He was linked to a well-established family in Philadelphia. Both his biological parents are now deceased. Some family members are cooperating, while others remain silent. The refusal to talk has sparked debates about moral versus legal responsibility. While these individuals may not have committed the murder, did they enable it through silence or complicity? And do they owe the public and Joseph a clearer account of what happened? If justice through prosecution is no longer possible, public memory becomes the new courtroom. Remembering Joseph, sharing his story, educating others about the dangers of family secrecy and child neglect is a form of justice in itself. Activists have proposed memorials, educational campaigns, and reforms in how cold cases are handled. A scholarship in Joseph's name is being discussed by child welfare advocates. The Vidic Society, a group of cold case experts who helped keep his case alive, is compiling a public report on how his story could shape future investigations. Schools in Philadelphia have begun including his story in sociology and criminology curriculums. These are not just symbolic gestures. They are acts of justice that ensure Joseph's life, though short, will leave a lasting impact. The boy in the box case proves that technology can resurrect voices long silenced. It was forensic genealogy, the same tool that identified the Golden State Killer, that finally put a name to the unidentified child. And this technology is still evolving. AI facial reconstruction is helping law enforcement reimagine what unidentified victims may have looked like. Ancestry databases are helping cold case teams locate familial links that were previously impossible. Crowdsourcing platforms like web sleuths and Reddit have become virtual war rooms for amateur investigators, many of whom contributed key theories in Joseph's case. By connecting the public with technology, we're seeing a new form of justice, community-driven truth-seeking. Can the killer still be found? This is the question that haunts everyone who has followed the case. Officially, no suspect has been named, but investigators have narrowed their scope dramatically. There are whispers that someone within the extended family may hold the answers, or worse, may have been involved. Investigative journalist sources suggest a few possibilities. A concealed pregnancy that resulted in Joseph being hidden from public records. A caretaker with known violent behavior or mental health issues. A family cover-up that may have spanned generations. Whether or not a killer is named, the investigation remains active, with new tips still being received weekly. What can we learn from Joseph's story? Children deserve to be seen. Joseph's invisibility is what allowed his death to remain a mystery for so long. In today's world, ensuring every child is accounted for must be a social priority. Silence is complicity. The refusal to report, to remember, or to speak about abuse enables it to continue. Joseph's story should encourage communities to speak up, even when it's uncomfortable. Persistence matters. This case took 65 years to break, and it only happened because law enforcement, volunteers, and the public refused to let it go cold. Technology plus humanity equals justice. Science can help solve crimes, but it's the human will to care that gives those tools their power. In 2023, a new headstone was placed for Joseph at Ivy Hill Cemetery in Philadelphia. It reads, Joseph Augustus Zarelli, America's unknown child no more. 1953 to 1957. Visitors now leave flowers, notes, and toys at his grave. His resting place, once a symbol of mystery, has become a beacon of remembrance. More importantly, Joseph's case has sparked new funding for cold case units across the U.S. It has inspired thousands to take up forensic science, criminal justice, and child advocacy as careers. In a way, Joseph is still changing lives, long after his own ended. True crime stories often leave us with unresolved questions. They fascinate, horrify, and linger in our minds. But Joseph's story is different. It doesn't just raise questions about who did it. It challenges us to look at ourselves. What kind of society loses a child and never looks for him? What kind of world allows a mystery this large to fade into obscurity? Joseph Augustus Zarelli is no longer the boy in the box. He is a name, a history, a human being. And as long as his story is told, as you're hearing it now, he is remembered. Let that be his justice. For more chilling true crime stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel.